Right, should we have a look at what's happening with the King today? Because he's going to head to church near Balmoral for, understandably, private prayer and reflection in remembrance of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, on this, the second anniversary of her death.
King Charles and Queen Camilla are expected to spend the day at Crathie Kirk Church, where the late Queen worshipped. Royal reporter Cameron Walker reflects on that September day when the country lost one of its most beloved figures and King Charles's life started as head of state.
Buckingham Palace has indeed confirmed in the last few moments that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was 96 years old.
She was like a real inspiration.
She's been very diligent and honourable.
Sending thoughts and prayers to the family and hope, that the transition goes quite smoothly.
It's been 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle after 70 years on the throne.
Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
Her eldest son became King Charles III, pledging himself to the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip hip!
His Majesty's time on the throne has seen celebration, state visits and health scares. The latest YouGov polling suggests 2/3 of the people believe Britain should continue to have a monarchy. Hardly any change since Charles became king, who himself has favourability ratings of 63%. A master of soft diplomacy, the King's overseas visits to France, Germany and Kenya were deemed big successes, cementing Great Britain's place on the world stage. The King was also the first British monarch to address the German Parliament, paying tribute to the deep historical bonds.
Today, it gives me particular pride to be with you once again, now as King, and to renew the special bond of friendship between our two countries.
Despite being 75 years old, the King has continued to throw himself into charity work alongside his constitutional duties. His Majesty launched the Coronation Food Project to support charities feeding disadvantaged Brits. Mindful of the extra money he's made from the Crown Estate's wind farm projects, His Majesty's asked that the profits be redirected to the wider public good.
King Charles is due to go to hospital for the treatment of an enlarged prostate.
The surgery was successful, but further tests diagnosed His Majesty with a separate form of cancer. He was forced to step back from public duties, something his nephew Peter Phillips said deeply frustrated him. The Queen suggested it was difficult to get him to rest instead of overworking himself.
You haven't got too cold.
In April, a glimmer of hope emerged when His Majesty met members of the public on Easter Sunday at Windsor ahead of a phased return to public duties. His first engagement since his cancer diagnosis was to a Macmillan Cancer Centre in London, becoming a new patron of Cancer Research UK. Doctors have now given the King the green light to travel to Australia and Samoa next month for an autumn tour, suggesting his health is stable. Yesterday, the King attended the annual Braemar gathering. Today, His Majesty is marking his accession day privately, in the place his reign began. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Let's talk to royal expert Michael Cole, who's in Norfolk. Michael, it's always good to see you, of course. And Cameron beautifully looking at what's been achieved by the King over this difficult couple of years, actually. But it's worth just sitting back, isn't it, and reflecting on Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, because it seems, frankly, unbelievable that it has been 2 years since we lost her.
Yeah, I remember it well. I was on the way to the studio where you're sitting now when I heard the news. Of course, it was an extraordinary reign, record-breaking in every respect. And throughout that reign, the Queen never put a foot wrong. Her size 4 foot went around the world to many, many countries, representing this country in the best possible way. So it's really rather extraordinary to reflect when we see her there. The unkind attack which has just been made upon her memory by Sir Ian McKellen, a man who's done rather well out of royal patronage. He was a Knight of the Realm. He is a Knight of the Realm, and he is a Companion of Honor. And it was the lady we see there who invested him as a Companion of Honor. There's only 65 of those, and that distinction is given after achievement over a very long period of time. And yet now, Sir Ian accuses the Queen of being mad. I mean, that is the most extraordinary claim he makes. I cannot think of any woman in the world or any person who was more down to earth, more sensible, and also very, very astute. We're talking about mad monarchs. Of course, we think of King Lear, and Sir Ian played King Lear 6 years ago. And to slightly misquote Shakespeare, the king says, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless actor." Well, he said daughter, but actor in this case, because it's a clear case of biting the hand that has fed you rather well.
I think many people feel very strongly hearing those criticisms of the Queen, and only 2 years, of course, after she passed away, because people felt so strongly. I remember when she died, how devastated I felt, and going to the lying in state, and everybody will remember where they were when they heard that news. Obviously, as you said, very big shoes for Charles to fill. But do you think that he's made a good go of it, actually, even though he's had such bad news himself personally, but also within the family, including the Princess of Wales, that Charles is known for being a real workaholic, very much like Princess Anne, a very, very hard worker. Do you think that his first 2 years as monarch, he's sort of successfully stepped into the Queen's shoes? And everybody, I'm sure, would agree that it would be very difficult to outshine her, but that he's done a very good job.
Yeah, Emma, I think you summed it up brilliantly. I think he's been a huge success. Of course, a great act to have to follow. He's doing extraordinarily well, and a short reign, as of course it's compared with hers, it's going to be short, can be very, very successful. His great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII, only ruled for 10 years, reigned for 10 years. But people remember that Edwardian era as a golden age and think back on it very fondly. And I think the way the king has started, particularly the 2 state visits, which Cameron highlighted, were a huge success. He had the longest apprenticeship in history, 70 years, waiting to become king, and he's fulfilling the role very well, despite his own personal difficulties and the challenges that come with being treated for this undisclosed cancer. He looks happy. He looks very fulfilled, and he looks as if he's made for the role. And of course he was. And I think he couldn't have done better, despite the difficulties which personally he's encountering. So I think a good first 2 years, but he will be remembering very closely and very candidly and very acutely the loss of his mother at Balmoral 2 years ago.
He certainly will. Michael, as always, it's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Martin, how important is it for us to be, looking back on Her Majesty's legacy and reflecting? I think many people will be thinking about where they were when they heard that news.
I think a number of things stand out from her extraordinary reign. The first is service. It was the hallmark of her reign, and I think it raises questions about what it means to hold public office. We've seen a lot of turbulence in the last 2 years, and I think the Queen's reign really underscores those in office, those in power are there to serve. And she exemplified that in a most extraordinary way. The second thing is discretion. I've heard it said that meetings with the Queen were the only one that senior politicians could go into, and no, it wouldn't be leaked anywhere. And I think that sense of discretion is really important. And that's something into which Charles has grown. People sometimes wondered how he would cope being quite an outspoken Prince of Wales, but he has grown into that role, and I think into a template set by his mother. Thirdly, I think the value of a hereditary, non-political head of state in our constitution is underscored by her reign. We've seen the kind of turbulence that happens around the world when heads of state are so deeply polarized and polarizing. And I think for me personally, it really has underscored the value of the hereditary head of state in the UK. And finally, very important to myself as an Anglican lay minister in the Church of England, is her quiet, strong Christian faith. It underpinned her and what she did and her reign, but she accompanied it with deep respect for all of all faiths and none. Those are the things that really stand out for me from the extraordinary reign from this extraordinary Queen.
We do learn from our parents, Ingrid, don't we? And it has to be said, of all those key points, which I think Martin outlined brilliantly, actually, the King does seem to follow on all of those points. I think despite a difficult couple of years because of health issues, he's done remarkably well.
I certainly agree with Martin. I think everyone would. And I would have said, instead of service, I would have said duty, which is really the same thing. And I think this is what King Charles has taken from his late mother, this sense of duty above all else. So, for instance, when Charles discovered that he was suffering from cancer, he was determined it wasn't going to stop him. It might have slowed him right down, but it wasn't going to stop him because he still had to continue to do his duty as king. And he did come into a great many difficulties when he ascended the throne, mainly because of his own family. And basically, although Prince Harry hadn't published his book, Spare, at the time, the king knew it was looming. There was still the problem with the Duke of York. There was all kinds of things going on. There was the new series of The Crown was coming out. There was a whole lot of what you call sort of riffraff going on when King Charles ascended the throne. So he just sort of seemed to take it with both hands, and he sort of burst, I feel, upon his role, because suddenly he was there shaking hands, allowing people to hug them and hugging them back. It was very, very different from his mother, and he really embraced it.
And Martin, we are all of us, in some deep fundamental sense, Elizabethans. But Charles is, of course, a monarch going into a very different age to when the Queen ascended to the throne. So, in terms of the importance of the monarchy constitutionally, you said you're, a lay minister in the Church of England, and we're seeing changes, constitutional changes from the Labour Party with respect to the hereditary principle in the House of Lords. How important is the monarchy within our constitutional ecosystem with respect to also the established church?
I think it's very important in two ways. First of all, it is an anchor of stability. If we think about, we're talking about a monarchy here, over a millennium old, that can trace its roots right back to Alfred the Great and beyond that, for all the changes in royal families and dynasties in that time. And I think that's important to remember, that there have been huge, monumental, seismic changes, in the last 1,000 years, obviously. And yet the monarchy is an anchor within that. And I think that is the first thing. I think there is a principle here that the monarchy gives one, if you like, an anchor at times of storms, a sense of continuity, a sense of history, a sense of connectivity with our past that helps us make sense of our present. And I think that's really important. But I also think the monarch's role as Supreme Governor of the head of the Church of England is important. But I think what Charles brings to that is this concept that, as well as having that role, and he clearly has deep respect for that role, he also sees deep respect and exemplifies deep respect for spirituality and the spiritual in our material world as well. And so, as a member of the Church of England, I am very pleased to have the monarch as the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, but I'm also equally pleased that that monarch sees himself, as herself in the past, as the monarch of all people, of all faiths and none. And I think that's something that Charles brings to the table and will emphasize at the table this sense that we are more than just a physical, we are spiritual, creative, complicated people. I think he understands that. His mother did too. He's been very open about this. And I think that's part of that stability at times of turbulence and change. And the monarchy still exemplifies that under Charles.
OK, there we have to leave it as we enter our Carolean age. Good to see you both this morning. Thank you very much indeed.